It is important that all massage therapists have a clear understanding of the medical terminology attached to describing the movements of limbs and different parts of the body in and out of the body, and to understand descriptions of whether something's above or below, having an understanding of the Latin terms attached to these movements. Superior is a term that relates to moving a part of your body superiorly. So moving the arm over your head would be moving it superiorly. Moving your arm down towards your knee would be moving it inferiorly. If I wanted to move my arm posteriorly, I would put it behind me. And anteriorly, I would put it in front. Medial refers to moving something towards the midline, and the midline is a sort of invisible line down the middle of the body at the front and the back. So moving my arm medially would be bringing it forward towards the midline. Moving my arm laterally means to move it out to the side. Proximal means that something is nearer to one point of the body than another. So my elbow is proximal to my head, as opposed to my fingertips being distal or further away. My heart is deeper in my body than my skin, which is more superficial and nearer the surface. Throughout medical terminology, you get words that mean the opposite of something else. So superior might be moving a limb above your head, and inferior might be below. So superior and inferior are opposite terms. Anterior and posterior are also opposites, as are medial and lateral. Proximal and distal. Something might be superficial, meaning on the surface of the body, the opposite would be deeper. Plantarflexion refers to the term of planting your foot onto the floor. So you might point your toe, plant your foot down to the floor. Dorsiflexion would be that you're flexing your ankle and you're pointing your toe up to the ceiling. So plantarflexion and dorsiflexion are the opposite. Flexion is a term relating to shortening the distance with a limb. So if I bend my elbow and bring my arm up towards my body, that would be a flexion. Whereas extension, I would be straightening my arm and taking it away from the body. So flexion and extension are opposites. Abduction refers to taking something away from the body. Like if you abduct a child, you take it away from you. Whereas adduction, meaning to add something to the body, is bringing it towards you. A lateral rotation is when you might rotate your arm laterally, so you're going out to the side of the body, as opposed to a medial rotation, which is bringing your arm into the middle, in front of you. Elevation means to elevate, so you might elevate your shoulders and lift them upwards, whereas depression is the opposite. So if you pull your shoulder blades down towards your bottom, then that is depressing your shoulder blades. Inversion relates to your foot and turning the inside of your foot inwards. So inversion is the opposite of eversion. Eversion is turning the outside of your foot upwards. In any one movement, you have a lot of movement in the muscles. You have the muscles that make the movement, and then you have the opposing muscles that work with it that are resting. So the biceps and the triceps work together in agonistic and antagonistic ways. So when the biceps is flexing the elbow, it's the agonist, and the triceps is resting. That is called an antagonist. Now, a fixator is a muscle that is assisting in the movement by supporting the origin of the muscle. So when the biceps is moving and flexing the elbow, the rotator cuff muscles are assisting by being a fixator to help the origin of that movement. And the synergists are other muscles involved in that movement who are assisting the main movement in that movement. So the biceps doesn't flex the elbow on its own. It does it with the brachioradialis. It does it with the brachialis as well. So you have a group of muscles helping in that movement. So the agonist in a flexion of the elbow is your biceps predominantly. The antagonist is the triceps. The fixators of that movement are the rotator cuff muscles because they're holding that origin in place and giving it support. And the synergistic muscles are also going to be the brachialis, the brachioradialis as well. So in any one movement, there are roles for different muscles to play at the same time. Flexion is where you decrease the angle between two parts of the body. So here we can see that the leg, the knee, in fact, is being flexed. So the foot is coming closer to the body because the knee is flexed. So the knee is bent, really. That is a flexion. And if we straighten the leg, then that would be an extension, which is the opposite. So these knee flexors are a group of muscles which cross the posterior part of the knee joint, and when they contract, they induce a flexion. So the knee flexors in this case are going to be the hamstrings. They're going to be on the back of the body, and when they shorten and contract, the bottom part of the leg, which is the tibia and the fibula, come towards the femur and shorten the distance between the two parts of the body. If it was an elbow, then we would be flexing the elbow and shortening the distance, so bringing the wrist towards the shoulder. Extension is the opposite of flexion, and in this picture we can see that the elbow is flexed, which shortens the distance between the wrist and the shoulder. But with an extension, we're lengthening the distance, so increasing the angle between the body parts. So when the arm is straight, the wrist is much further away from the shoulder. A conventional handshake is done with fingers that are fully extended. When we stand up, the knees are extended. Extension of the hip and shoulder moves the limb backwards towards the posterior side of the body. So we're increasing the distance between two parts of the body when we extend. Abduction means to bring something away from the body. If I abduct a child, that child is taken away. So abduction is taking a limb away from the midline of the body. If you remember, the midline is this invisible line down the middle of the body. So an abduction of your arm is to take it away from the midline, so out towards the side. Adduction is the opposite of abduction, and it means that you are going to add it to the body. So you're going to bring a limb towards the midline of the body. Rotation normally refers to the head or the vertebral column. So you might rotate the head to one side or the other, and that's rotation. It's turning it around, specifically maybe to look over your shoulder. So a driver rotates their head to look behind them to make sure nothing's coming. And the vertebral column rotates at the waist. So you might rotate your waist and turn the body round to the side. So rotation is turning the head or turning the vertebral column. Lateral and medial rotation refers to moving your arms and legs in or out from the body. So internal rotation is the same as medial rotation or inward rotation. So we might move the arm or the shoulder, the hip or the toes inwards towards the midline, whereas external rotation or outward rotation or lateral rotation is the opposite, and that would be turning the toes or the hips or the arms away from the body. Circumduction is a movement that means taking the hip or the arm through its full rotation of movements. It's a combination of flexion, extension, adduction, and abduction to sort of create a cone-shaped movement. So if you want to bring your arm up, out, back, and forward, it's called circumduction in a full circle. So this can only be done with a ball and socket joint. The term prone means to lie face down. So if you're lying on the floor with your face to the floor, you're lying prone. Pronation, though, is a term which refers to the lower part of the arm. So your elbow would be slightly flexed or bent. And pronation happens with a pivot joint. So the pivot joint is between the ulnar and the radius bone of the lower arm. And when these two bones pivot on one another, the hand turns face down. So turning the hand down towards the supination is the opposite of pronation. And if we lie prone, we lie face down on the floor. If we lie supine, then we lie face up. And supination and pronation occur on the lower part of the arm because of two bones pivoting on one another. These bones are the radius and the ulnar of the lower arm, and the elbow needs to be slightly flexed in order for pronation and supination to happen. So pronation is when you have the hand facing downwards. Supination is when you have the hand facing up. And I tend to remember this as supination. If you had a bowl of soup in your hand and you're holding it face up, then the soup is going to be fine. But if you then try and spill it, or you're prone to spilling it by pronating the hand, turning it down, then it's prone to spill. So supination is face up, pronation is face down. And this can only be done at the lower arm because of the pivot joint between those two bones. Dorsiflexion only refers to the ankle or the foot, and dorsiflexion is the opposite of plantarflexion. Dorsiflexion is when we bring the toes towards us and bend at the ankle. This is obviously done when we drive a car. When we take our foot off the pedal, we perform dorsiflexion. Plantarflexion is the opposite of dorsiflexion. Plantar is a name referring to the bottom of the foot, the sole of the foot. Plantarflexion is when we point the toes down to the floor and we plant them quite firmly on the floor. So we might be pressing a pedal in a car. That would be a plantarflexion. And releasing that pedal would be a dorsiflexion. Inversion refers to the foot and turning the inside of the feet inwards. So you move the sole towards the mid-plane of the foot. It's the same as if you twist your ankle, sprain your ankle. It's usually the outside of the ankle that you sprain. So you need to go turning the foot inside towards the inside of the foot. The muscles involved, the synergistic muscles that all have to work together for this, are the tibialis anterior and posterior, the flexor digitorum longus, and the flexor and extensor hallucis longus are the muscles involved in performing this action. Eversion is when you move the foot outwards, so the outside edge of the foot outwards or upwards. Like when you're skiing and you're trying to traverse a slope when you're skiing. The muscles involved in this are the peroneus longus and brevis and the extensor digitorum longus. Lateral flexion can only really happen with the head or the vertebral column, and it's when the head wants to move sideways. So lateral flexion would be ear to the shoulder. And vertebral flexion would be bending from the waist to the lateral side, to the outside. The muscles involved in lateral flexion for the head are trapezius, levator scapula, splenius capitis, sternocleidomastoid, and the scalenes. They all flex at the same time to the side, and the antagonists would then be the opposite muscles on the other side. Horizontal adduction or flexion is where the arm is placed horizontally to the side and is then adducted, so it's brought into the body and across the front of the body. That's a horizontal flexion or adduction. And the muscles involved in that are going to be the deltoid and the pectoralis major. The antagonistic muscles will be the deltoid, infraspinatus, and the teres minor. So the synergistic will be the deltoid, that'll be the anterior fibers, and the antagonistic will be the posterior fibers. Horizontal abduction is also known as extension, and it's the opposite of the adduction. So the arm is in a horizontal position out to the side, and with extension we need to bring the arm away from the body. So we're bringing it back behind us in a straight arm so that it's abducted away from the body. The muscles involved in this is going to be the deltoid, the posterior fibers, and the infraspinatus, the teres minor. The antagonist muscles are going to be the deltoid anterior and the pectoralis major. So this is the exact opposite. Protraction and retraction normally happen with the scapula, the clavicle, the head, and the jaw. So protraction is to protrude, and this occurs when the movement is anterior. So you can bring your jaw forward or backwards. So it's a protraction if you bring it forward. It's a retraction if you bring it backwards. So with the shoulder, you can bring your shoulders forward, the scapula forward, and you can also bring them back together so that the movement is posterior. An elevator is a lift and it moves upwards. So elevation of any joint is moving it upwards. So in this case, it could be the scapula, could be the jaw, could be the rib cage. The scapula can be moved upwards and we can elevate it superiorly, or we can pull it down and depress it inferiorly. We move our rib cage up when we breathe and depress it down when we breathe out. So the synergistic muscles for the scapula would be the trapezius, the serratus anterior, pectoralis minor, and the antagonistic muscles would be the trapezius, the rhomboids, and the levator scapula. And obviously they would alternate depending on whether you're elevating or you're depressing.